Just waiting for the cameraman to tell me we're okay, and then we'll get going on the council meeting. All right. If you could rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Clerk, if you could call the roll, please.
Alderman Strelchak.
Here.
Alderman Bushy.
Here.
Alderman Meyer.
Here.
Alderman Hancher.
Here.
Alderman Garrow.
Here.
Alderman Brian Schneider.
Here.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider.
Here.
Alderman Nurbin.
Here.
Mayor Ware.
Here. The first item of business is a public hearing on ordinance 2019. It's an ordinance to rezone the properties at 10865 through 10911 Northport Washington Road and the parcel immediately behind it. From IPS to business zoning. It was recommended by the Planning Commission on June 10th. We had a first reading at the July meeting. Do we have a motion to go into public hearing?
Move to go into public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are in a public hearing on that item. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on that particular item? If you could step forward, Mr. Irwin. Please state your name and speak into the microphone.
I'll do that. Thank you, Mayor Worth. My name is Rob Irwin. I am a longtime resident of Mequon, and my current address is 1501 West Winding Hollow Lane. I'm also the current board chair of the owner of the subject property. I believe that the council should approve this matter this evening. And rezone it, since it provides the city with an excellent opportunity to achieve a number of favorable objectives. And let me just mention several. First of all, as you've seen in the staff materials, this site has been vacant and undeveloped for a little over 10 years at this time. The approval to the rezoning as proposed would create a very attractive project with a number of desirable community uses within the B2 zoning district, one which a number of nearby residents who live in both condo communities and apartment projects nearby would be able to use and enjoy. Secondly, this project the land is located in one of the city's TIF districts, which was created specifically for purposes of redevelopment to the Port Washington Road corridor south of Mequon Road. And this project would create that activity and vitality that the TIF district was created to allow for. Thirdly, this project would also greatly expand the city's tax base. The notes on the staff memo indicate a completed value of approximately $12 million, which is about 6 times the current assessed value for the land, which would certainly be an improvement fiscally. And lastly, the project inadvertently learned early on that there were a number of specimen trees on the site. Both the current owner and the applicant have worked very hard and diligently with the city's forester to develop a mutually agreeable preservation plan, which will allow for the incorporation into the site plan most of the healthy and most valuable specimen trees on the site. So you can see by that you're getting a combination of preserving the old along with creating some new vitality in this area that the city desires to create such activity in. So based on these positive benefits, I would urge that the council vote to approve this rezoning request tonight and ratify the Plan Commission's unanimous approval. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this particular item? Seeing none, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Move to close public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
The next item on the agenda is personal appearances and public comment. Citizens wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda may do so at this time. If you desire to be heard on agenda items, please do that when the item's considered. Please speak into the microphone at the podium. Time limit is 5 minutes. We have only one person who's registered to speak under public comment, Debbie Tomczyk. Ms. Tomczyk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. My name is Debbie Tomczyk. I'm the head of the real estate department at Reinhardt Berner, and our firm represents Spur 16. And I'm here to speak about some orders that have been issued to us. Spur 16 has a development agreement, as you know, with the city. I think in all respects, all significant major respects, we've overperformed. We have developed well over the $26.1 million of assessable value that's required by the development agreement. Our commercial component is required by the development agreement to be completed by December 31 of 2020. It's done and very successful. And above and beyond that is the public market, which is not something that at the time was actually contemplated, but which, if you've been to it, and hopefully you have, and hopefully you'll be going many times again, is just an amazing amenity for downtown Mequon, and I think for the whole region. I'm familiar with the downtown Milwaukee public market that was financed and developed through a nonprofit and operated with nonprofits. Spur 16 has funded on a private basis that entire public market, and it's just a wonderful amenity to the community. And we're very pleased that we've been able to bring that to the community. We also, in response to that, and in my 25 years, a first for me, we were issued orders by the city. We were actually given orders to correct, which were followed by penalties that were assessed by the city. These orders were issued to us on July 23rd and required action by July 26th, or 25th in some cases, in a 2 or 3 day turnaround in the midst of a very busy construction timeline. Many of these things require us to actually hire contractors, order materials. It's impossible to perform under these orders. We went to a meeting with the city attorney and with the planning staff, and were followed up with the orders on about 3 days' notice, the following week, with orders and with actual citations with per diem penalties that related back not even just to July 23rd, but to July 1st. We have appealed those orders to the Board of Appeals. Those are pending, and that may take us to a court system. We have been trying to find a good resolution to all of these problems that are perceived by the city. All but 2 of the items that are mentioned in the orders have been complete by Spur 16. The 2 that have not, one is picture framing on a sidewalk, which will require us to actually rip out the sidewalk and replace it entirely. That seems to be an extreme remedy in my view. The second is, after having walked with the city forester and planner to install additional trees, to being told that we're not providing adequate shading, even though the shading is supposed to be measured 12 years after full growth. So all of the orders have been satisfied but for those 2 items, but those orders and the per diem penalties remain on the books from the city. And we're hopeful that there is a cooperative resolution to that. We understand that a key concern from the city's perspective is the railroad crossing. That railroad crossing was addressed in our development agreement with the city. That development agreement required that the city provide us by September 1st of 2017 evidence that there was actual a right to install that railroad crossing. We did not receive that written evidence from the city. The city did not perform that obligation. But in the spirit of cooperation, we are willing to offer to pay for the pavement for the crossing if there'd be a settlement to our outstanding orders. So we appreciate your consideration of this. We're hopeful that there is a way to make this continue to be a real positive for the community, which is what we view this development to be. But this treatment, in my 25 years of working on this type of matter, is a first. And I'm hopeful that there's a way to move forward and to find a good resolution for both Spur 16 and the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tomczyk. The next item on the agenda is public officials' reports. I have just kind of stunned by the last presentation. Have a report that I'd like to make. There is, we all talk about how important the fire department is to the city of Mequon. And in our gut, we know that. But over the last week, there have been 4 instances of extraordinary service by the fire department that I think is worth the council and the community taking note of. Last Monday, there was a report, the fire department received a report of a cardiac arrest from a bystander who was actually performing CPR at the time. The dispatchers utilized the emergency medical dispatch software to assist the citizen performing the CPR.
In this day and age, we're still waiting.
Is it there now? Okay, thank you. So a police officer arrived on the scene, used the defibrillator, applied it to the citizen. They then continued CPR until the first Mequon fire responder arrived. They took over CPR. When the paramedic finally arrived, which was fairly quickly, the patient was switched over to the advanced cardiac monitor. Another 3 shocks were delivered. After the 4th shock, the patient's heart finally restarted. As the patient was being moved to the EMS stretcher, his heart stopped again. CPR was resumed and 1 more shock delivered. The 5th shot was the last one needed, and the patient was placed in the back of the ambulance for emergency transport to the hospital. While in the back of the ambulance, the patient regained consciousness. As of today, he's still at the hospital and is being treated and doing better. Without the prompt, both CPR by the resident, as well as everybody in this process doing their jobs well, that would be a resident of the city of Mequon who no longer would be with us. And it's good to take note of the fact that our people do, and that was a pretty heroic recovery. So I'd like to at least mention Mequon resident Jeffrey Zilich, who was the neighbor who provided CPR, dispatch supervisor Melina Bowen, who provided the instructions, police officer Jason Myrtle, who applied the shock, and the Mequon fire responders, paramedic Joshua Lip, paramedic Greg Gillis, EMT Jacob Iviska, EMT Robert Bell, EMT Quantavius Tucker, Deputy Chief Dave Deppies, and Deputy Chief Kurt Zellman. The second was equally as remarkable. There was a report on Wednesday of a patient who was found unconscious and unresponsive after multiple bee stings. Mequon fire responders were on the scene at 2 concurrent calls when this event was dispatched. 1 first responded cleared from one of the calls, and a second EMT responded directly from a residence in a personal vehicle. Once on scene, the first responders found a female patient unconscious and unresponsive in a bed. The patient had shallow respirations and a very weak pulse. Attempts at providing the patient with life-saving breaths were unsuccessful due to severe facial swelling from the bee stings. Concurrently, the first responder administered a shot of epinephrine to counteract the effects. Another wave of responders arrived with advanced life support equipment. The patient's airway was evaluated, and there was no other option but to perform a surgical procedure to access the trachea below the voice box. So they used a scalpel and cut a hole in the patient's neck, and a breathing tube was inserted. Now, that happens all the time on TV, but it doesn't happen all the time in real life, particularly by people in the field. It was performed flawlessly, and once the breathing tube was in, the patient's vital signs rapidly improved and stabilized. The patient was transported to a local hospital and is reported to be up and walking less than 24 hours later. I'd like to recognize paramedic Amy Bull, paramedic Amando Suarez Del Rio, paramedic Matthew Schneider, EMT A. Heather Kruger, EMT Quantavious Tucker again, intern Deontay Pettis, intern Ernesto Campos, trainee Dean Knaus, Deputy Chief Dave Deppies, and Deputy Chief Kurt Zellman. I also would note, as our Deputy Chief Zellman pointed out, that wouldn't have occurred if the administrator and council allowed the fire department to rent a backup ambulance. We were short an ambulance, we rented a backup, even though maybe we didn't need it. But if we didn't have that, this other person would no longer be with us, and without the heroic efforts. I greatly apologize, but I lost one of the four. But I would like to point out Deputy Chief Kurt Zellman. There has been a senior citizen in Mequon who 3 times over the past month has fallen responders have had to lift her and help her back inside her home. The last call was on Thursday. Our providers responded and assisted her back in the house. They noted certain conditions, including no working smoke detectors. Deputy Chief Zellman went to her house on Friday to install the smoke detectors, noticed that she was not in good shape. She didn't want to go to the hospital. He stayed for a few hours to convince her to go to the hospital on his own time. It was about 3.5 hours. And then he went to the hospital and stayed with her until 2:30 in the morning on his own time to make sure she was getting treatment, that she didn't go home, that she was getting the help that she needs. And he also has now contacted her family and contacted other people to support her. Now, that's the type of dedicated employees we have as a community, and it's good to recognize that and to realize that these aren't people who just show up because there's a little brush fire or that, somebody needs stitches. And I'd like to just give a round of applause to our fire department and our ambulance. The next item of business is the city administrator's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have any long comments this evening, but one brief mention. 25 days from now, the city will be hosting its 8th annual Taste of Mequon out here on Cedarburg Road, just in front of City Hall. The event will take place on Saturday, September 7th, between the hours of noon and 9 p.m. And as in past years, we'll have lots of entertainment options available for residents and other visitors to Mequon. And as of last reports, we've got over 20 food vendors and restaurants that'll be participating in this year's event. This event has gotten bigger and better every year, and so we're inviting everyone in the community to come out and enjoy the nice fall weather and the camaraderie and the fellowship that comes with hanging out with your fellow residents and neighbors here in Mequon out on Cedarburg Road. Again, Saturday, September 7th from 12 to 9, Taste of Mequon.
I'd like to add one more thing to my report, and it's brief, but Mequon has a new event on Sunday and Monday of this week. It's the Jewish Food Festival. It's not just going to be food, there will also be music and games for kids. The more of these type of family events we have as a community, the better off we are as a community. The more participation we have from people in the community, the closer we are as a community. And I hope that people get out and support it. It's Sunday and Monday. I don't have the hours. I don't know if Glenn, do you know the hours?
Not offhand, but there's signs.
But there will be corned beef and pastrami and knishes and lots of good food. It should be a great new event and just another one of the good family events we have here in Mequon. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. And I'll read through this. The Common Council minutes of July 9th, the Architectural Board minutes of June 10th, the Economic Development Board minutes of May 28th, the Festivals Committee minutes of June 10th, the Finance Personnel Committee minutes of June 11th, the Bike and Pedestrian Way Commission minutes of June 6th and July 11th, the Park and Open Space Board minutes of May 15th, the Planning Commission minutes of May 28th and June 10, the Public Safety Committee minutes of June 11, the Public Welfare Committee minutes of June 11, the Public Works Committee minutes of June 11th, the Sewer Utility District Commission minutes of June 11th. That was a busy day. Acceptance of the 2018 Popular Annual Financial Report. Do we have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Anybody want anything removed? I can't imagine. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We also have four first readings, ordinance 2019-1546, which will establish an extension of health insurance continuation benefits to non-represented employees retiring. Ordinance 2019-1551, an ordinance amending Chapter 58 related to animal regulations. Ordinance 2019-1552, an ordinance amending Chapter 14, the alcoholic beverages section of our ordinances. And ordinance 2019-1553, an ordinance creating section 46-135, the Mequon Municipal Code, establishing safety zones around automatic teller machines. All of these have been approved by or recommended by their appropriate committees. We have one ordinance on the agenda tonight. We had a public hearing about it earlier. Ordinance 2019-1550. This is for the property at 10865 to 10911 Northport Washington Road. To amend it from IPS to B2 PUD. I'm not sure if we had anybody sign up to. No, we did not. Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and that ordinance is approved. The first resolution on our agenda tonight is Resolution 3639, a resolution authorizing a land lease for $1 annually to the Mequon-Thiensville Rotary Foundation for the construction of the Mequon-Thiensville Community Gateway Project. This was recommended unanimously this evening by the Finance Personnel Committee. Ms. Tollefson, are you going to talk to us about this briefly?
And while she's getting ready, I'll just note that the recommendation was as amended, and that amendment is on the dais in front of you.
Yeah, I was going to get to that, but it was recommended. We made some language changes. We also made sure that we added some conditions to ensure that construction doesn't go forward until appropriate safeguards are reached. Both the foundation and the Finance Personnel Committee approved those recommendations. Ms. Tollefson.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. The City and the Gateway Committee was approached by the Thiensville-Mequon Rotary Foundation to create an opportunity to further the implementation of the Gateway feature, which has long been considered a public amenity and has received support and various approvals through the city for over a decade. The Thiensville-Mequon Rotary Foundation is presenting to us the opportunity to undertake the funding and construction of the Gateway feature, and the land lease that's in front of you tonight for your action is the first step to give the foundation the green light to consider bidding the project and trying to better understand ultimately what the cost of the project would be. It's anticipated that the foundation would have the knowledge of the cost of the project and be able to give their green light to the project by the end of August. If the foundation is successful in achieving a doable cost to the project, we would return to the Common Council in September for a development agreement. Some of the conditions that are listed in the resolution, the amended resolution, give you an indication of the contingencies that would be part of that development agreement. If there is not success in achieving a construction cost to the project based on the funding that's available, we would terminate the land lease and the project would not move forward. In terms of the high-level conditions as it relates to the land lease, it is, the term is through December 31st of 2021. It can be terminated by either party with 60-day notice. The property does need to remain tax exempt. The tenant would be paying an annual payment to the city of $1. And all of the permanent structures and improvements to the site would be city-owned property at the end of the construction project, and the foundation would take over maintenance and cleanup conditions of the project while under construction. The finance and personnel added some conditions, as you can see in the attached resolution. Those include financial commitments from both the Village of Thiensville, the city, and the threshold of funding that needs to occur prior to construction of the project being started.
Thank you. I'd note that there were several people who registered, none of whom asked to speak, but they did want to register their support for this item. Herbert Hillman, Sandy Coster, Stan Smith, Dan Gannon, Stan Lind, Tim Carr, and John Mickelson. I'm betting also Connie Bouquet will add her name to that list. But, thank you, Ms. Tollefson. Alderman Bushy.
Just a question as far as this kind of comes as a surprise because that land has been there before. What has actually changed in order to necessitate this agreement as far as, we've been going along with the assumption that at some point the Gateway project is going to be funded. Why now do we need an agreement and not have it come either at, was one needed, or, and then second is, wouldn't it be more fitting to have it at the time that approval is given for the Gateway
Yeah,
project?
can you speak into the mic,
Oh,
please?
sorry. So in short, much better. There wasn't a issue with the mic, it was the user. Why at this point have this agreement here as opposed to, first of all, that we didn't have any agreement and everything was, there was no changes going on. And then secondly is, why is this not necessary until the Gateway is approved?
To answer your first question, the land lease is being presented because basically the foundation wants to take ownership of the project and have it be a foundation-led project versus a city-led project, a public project. And the answer to the second question is that the fundraising, private fundraising group that has been out doing fundraising for the project includes individuals that can help facilitate not only the continued fundraising, but the construction of the project. And the foundation needs some sense of green light commitment from the city that this is something that they should continue their efforts and time and resources towards. So this gets us to that first step of giving them the opportunity to continue to pursue the construction, including discussing the cost of the construction with contractors.
I think that the city attorney was going to add something to this. He negotiated the lease.
Right. And I think Ms. Tollefson did a good job explaining the basics behind it. The bottom line on it really is just the difference between it being a kind of city-led project, city bid project that we were responsible for versus something that the committee themselves is moving forward and through the Rotary. It's not all that different than a lot of the other things. Some structures in River Barn Park, for example, where we had a lease that was in place. And as part of that lease, there were some improvements that were done that became ours at the end of the lease. A number of structures, even within the nature preserve, we did the same thing where we've got leased land there that the nature preserve has funded and done. At the end of the lease, those would become ours, at that point as well. So it's just really that difference between having it be our project that they were contributing money to versus a project that they are undertaking on their own for the purposes of doing it. And so it's just consistent with the way that we've done other similar type development.
It
within
gives them
city.
the opportunity to negotiate with individual contractors. It gives them the opportunity, much like a developer would, to, and it's going to be subject to a development agreement, so the city has the same rights and controls that it does for other projects in the city, to make sure that it's done timely, that the conditions we added are part of the development agreement, to make sure that it's done pursuant to approvals. But it's not government-led, it's the private organization-led, and that may be more efficient. Other comments or questions? Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comments? If not, could we call, Alderman,
No, I just want to commend Rotary for the efforts on this. I mean, you've done so many great projects in our community, and the fundraising on this is not going unnoticed. And that's been a point of contention for council, just with the amount of funds that we're going to potentially have to go to it. When we got that one high bid a little while back that we rejected, I just think it's really great that you came forward now and you wanted to do this for the community. And I just personally wanted to say thank you on the behalf of my constituents and any other ones that have talked to me recently. So thank you.
we have a motion and a second. Alderman Garrell.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also the projects that the Rotary's done has been outstanding over the years. I'm also hoping, or I'm happy that part of this that the Rotary's taking over is they are going to have a little leeway on design. I was not real thrilled with the 3 designs that came before us in the first place. They seem to me, and I'm just one alderman here, they seem pretty out of character. They just didn't have a theme, and I'm hopefully you have some time on this. Hopefully, maybe you'll come up with some type of a design on your own that's has a theme to it that really fits the city of Mequon. The little, 2 circular pattern that went to nowhere. I just thought, they only gave us 3 to choose from, and we chose one of them. I wasn't thrilled with it. I don't even think I voted for it, but I'm happy that you guys have a lot of creativity, and that if somebody comes up with an idea, work on it. Maybe come up with a better idea. I'm optimistic in that area. So, thank you.
Any other comments? Alderman
I
Schneider.
just want to make a comment that there's a clerical error on the page 154. Foundation is spelled wrong, so you might want to change that.
We do, if we can change that in the final version for signature. But anything else? If you could call the roll, please.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
That passes unanimously. The next resolution is Resolution 3640, a resolution awarding a contract for ambulance and fire billing services to LifeQuest Services Watoma. This was recommended this evening by the Finance Personnel Committee. Do we have a motion?
Move approval. Second.
Any questions or comments? This is part of our regular effort to rebid contracts on a regular basis to make sure that we're being competitive, and there's actually a bit of a cost savings here. If you could call the roll, please.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Aye.
That passes. The next item is a resolution authorizing staff to issue permits to Ozaukee County for the Little Menominee River Corridor Ecosystem Restoration Project at 9104 West Mequon Road. This was recommended by Public Works on July 9th. There was a public hearing at the Common Council on July 9th, and this was tabled by the Common Council on July 9th. We need a motion to take this off the table.
Make a motion to remove from table?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Sounds like it was unanimous. Kristen, are you going to, and perhaps the people from the county would, if they want to come forward again? You can pull up another chair. Before Kristen starts, if you can introduce yourselves again so we remember who we're talking to.
Where got it? Gotta hit somewhere.
Introduce yourself.
Good evening. I'm Beth Wenzel. I'm a civil engineer with Ozark County Planning and Parks Department.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Jason Zunel, County Administrator.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Struck. I am the Director of Planning and Parks for Ozaki County.
Thank you for joining us. Kristen. Or,
After
excuse me, Director Lundin, I should be more formal. Thank you.
At the last meeting after the item was tabled, we asked for some direction in terms of what the council was looking for in terms of additional information to be able to make their decision. That included a city staff review of the model, which we did. At your space today was also the review that MMSD staff completed that just came in to us this morning. And to address a monitoring schedule, what the recourse would be if there was an issue after the project was implemented, and a plan to address invasive species. Included in there is the information that was submitted by county staff as to what the intent is to address that, and then staff recommended that those be included in the intergovernmental cooperational agreement between Ozaki County and MMSD.
Where do people have questions or comments? Where does anyone want to start on the council? Do you want to, I'm sorry, I should offer it as the county wish to make, and before we get to, if you want to make any additional comments, then I will take their comments from the public also, before we get to the council, sorry. Okay, why don't we, there have been a number of people who've registered to speak. The first person on my pile is Mr. Bruce Ross. Mr. Ross, if you'd step forward, speak into the microphone, introduce yourself, and tell us, and he's registered in support of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Again, my name is Bruce Ross. I am a county supervisor for Northwest Mequon. I was elected only last year, and even before being elected, I became aware of the Little Menominee project. After I was elected, I asked to be on the Natural Resources Board so that I could, in part, better oversee the project and understand what was happening and address the concerns that I had heard even before my election. So I came to the project with a relatively healthy skepticism for the project, and throughout the course of the project, to this point, I've pushed for more information. We've actually gotten more grant money to do more outreach to the public. As a result, the questions that I've heard from my constituents and from concerned neighbors, I've taken aboard and looked to the staff and asked for their explicit responses to that. I stand before you in support of that project, although I came to it somewhat cautiously. I know today that you are considering issuing a permit for the things over which Mequon has jurisdiction. I know that the Natural Resources Board has begun to address at least one of your concerns, and unfortunately the wheels of county government, much like all of our governments, grind slower than we want in a moment like this. So the agreement between MMSD and the County of Ozaki is not ready for your review. However, there is a natural resources formal motion that directs the staff to develop that and address the long-term and during project maintenance responsibilities. I see in your permit motion or permit itself, approval for that permit, or direction to the staff to issue that permit, there's an in perpetuity component to it. And that strikes me as an extraordinarily high bar to ask a sister government to commit to. And I wonder why that would be the case. And it's just going to be very difficult, I think, just as it would be for the city of Mequon to commit to anything in perpetuity. It's going to be difficult for the county to commit to something in perpetuity. I speak only as one voice of the county board, of course, but I question why that would need to be there. I took a walk out through the project site just today, and I walked along. I took pictures, and I brought them if you're at all interested in it. And the maintenance of that spot, that project site, is only going to be improved through the course of this project. If you saw what I saw out there north of the project site and in the project site itself, what the county is proposing to do in this project is certainly going to improve that circumstance. It's not going to hurt it. And I wonder why we would hold a bar of in perpetuity up against the county when there's really going to be benefit to all of our constituents through the course of this project. I know there are some concerns from citizens. We've heard those concerns. We've tried to address them very directly. And I hope that you'll consider that as you consider this permit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next person registered to speak is Mark Hilgendorf of 11521 West Mequon Road. He wishes to speak in opposition.
Last couple weeks ago, I handed out some literature. I gave it to your mayor's secretary. Did she hand you that?
I'm not sure which.
Okay, it contained about how when streams are not maintained, how they cause flooding. And it's just in an agricultural paper, so it's the national problem we're having right now. But I want to address some of the last speaker's comment about this maintenance. Maybe remember a couple of years ago, Mayor, how one beaver in the southern part of this Menominee River Creek dammed up and started flooding Huntington Park. How the city had to go get permission from the landowner in Milwaukee County, had to get permission from the DNR, had to hire a trapper, trap out a beaver, and then the city had to go in there with their crews and take out the dam because it was flooding the Huntington Park. And remember all the work it took just to get rid of one beaver. Now this whole quarter mile gets full of that trash and the buckthorn and all the sediment that's gonna happen, this little creek gets filled up. That's something you guys should be thinking about before you give permission to the county, or unless you have some kind of maintenance and make the county stick to this maintenance. Because there's a lot of opposition that they do not want to keep this up. It hasn't gone through the county board yet. So I would wait or see what you can do before you're agreeing to this to make sure the county agrees to maintaining this. Because there's no money in a county board for this maintenance. It's not in the Natural Resource Board, which I am also on as advisor from the Farm Service Agency. So I would be very cautious agreeing to anything the county prevents that they would have to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hilgendorf. The next person registered to speak, well, actually, he doesn't say on here whether he wants to speak or not, but Steve Klug did file a sheet. Mr. Klug.
Hello, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm Steve Klug. My family and I own the farm on Freistadt Road that has a little Menominee running through our lower 40 acres. And some of the stuff I'll give you now is a little bit of the history of it. Our family owned the land when the creek was dug in 1913. The purpose of the creek was to improve drainage for the fertile soils in the area east of Freistadt. At the last meeting, there were some questions about how many tile lines there were entering the creek. From Mequon Road north to about a half a mile north of Freistadt Road, I'm aware of at least 5 tile lines that enter the creek directly. Most or all of these lines are now entering the creek under the water line because of the creek blockage, which has caused a couple of those tiles to bust, causing flooding on farmland. Most or all of these tiles there are at least 6 tile lines that enter ditches or waterways that then enter the creek. I'm sure there are more, but these are the ones I'm aware of. Each of these tile lines has thousands and thousands of feet of land tile feeding them. Over the years, the creek has gradually filled with grass, leaves, and tree branches, slowing the flow of water to the south. This has caused the lower fields to become waterlogged and very difficult or impossible to till. At this time, my concerns are, number one, by creating a meandering creek, the potential for slowing the flow increases. There's about 3.5 feet of pitch from Freistadt Road to Mequon Road. By creating a meandering creek, that adds 600, 700, or 800 feet to that, which brings it to about 6,000 feet, where there's 3.5 feet of pitch. That comes to about 1 inch of pitch for every 140 feet. That's pretty flat. Number two, if the new project is not maintained, it will only make the water situation worse. Who will maintain it and who will pay for it? I realize that the creek will continue to fill with debris every year. Without proper maintenance on this project, the creek will fill faster due to slower water flow. I've accepted the fact that my farm lowland will continue to deteriorate unless the whole creek is dredged. I also know that that will not happen in my lifetime. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Klug. The next person registered to speak is, Connie Pouquet registered her support, but does not wish to speak, which is obvious because she's gone. And the final person is Cheryl Nen from the Milwaukee River Keepers. She would like to speak and is registered in support.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Cheryl Nen. I'm with a group called Milwaukee River Keeper. We're a nonprofit organization. We were actually started in 1995 as Friends of the Menominee River. But our mission is to protect water quality and wildlife habitat and advocate for sound land use in the river basins, so the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers. We are here tonight in support of Ozaukee County's Little Menominee River Corridor Ecosystem Restoration Project. We've partnered with Ozaukee County many times over the last decade or so on similar projects, and I think they've done an amazing job on other creeks that they're currently working on, including Uleo and Mole Creeks. This project is the first of several, from our understanding, that will restore large portions of the Little Menominee River, converting what has become a channelized or straightened stream into more natural meandering sections of river. And in other projects, what we found when this happens is that it does slow down the water and allows it to better connect with the adjacent floodplains and the wetlands that are in the area, and actually can help improve flooding, improve water quality, and a lot of other benefits. This particular project is going to be built on 56 acres that are owned by MMSD and that were acquired by MMSD for flood management. And so this seems like a very good purpose for this particular project. Again, by putting in those meanders and slowing down the river, it will allow more water to infiltrate, which should reduce flooding in the area, improve water quality significantly, and also improve fish and wildlife habitat, especially with the wetland creation. It will improve native plant diversity from what is there today, as well as ecological function. So we think it's a really great project, and we would encourage you to grant the permits for it. I would just say, in response to a few of the last speakers, maintenance is an issue, and I think that the county will address that. We, as a citizen organization, there's many other nonprofit groups that are working in the watershed that I think would be happy to help in the future with maintenance needs, invasive species removal, and other restoration projects. We have that relationship now with Ozaukee County and other counties in our watershed. And so we'd be happy to help with that. Beavers are something we're dealing with in the entire watershed. They're really having a bit of a resurgence. They're actually excellent wetland creators, but we do need to manage them sometimes and impacts from them. But that is something that's happening really watershed-wide. And I would say, you know, actually improving the movement of the river. What tends to happen when you have a straightened river is it tends to kind of fill up with debris and log jams. And actually by meandering it, that actually can help improve that situation where a lot of those straight creeks are filling in with sediment and woody debris. So I think the project could help address some of those existing concerns that are happening now with the Little Menominee. And that's it. Thanks. We appreciate your support.
Thank you, Ms. Nen. That's the final speaker registered to speak. Questions or comments from council members? Alderman Meyer.
Speak to me again about what's going to be happening with the drain tile that's there.
Again, my name is Beth Wenzel, and I'm a civil engineer with the project. So we have, in the project reach, on the parcel, we have surveyed in the outlets of all the tile drains that come into the creek in that project. Now, some of those most of them are pretty high. They're not, I mean, there's a couple that are down pretty low, very close to the road crossing, but a lot of them are up pretty close to the surface. We also surveyed the bottom of, there's a perimeter ditch that goes around the property as well. And I don't know exactly when that was excavated, but that ditch is actually lower than most of the tile drains that we found. What this suggests is that the tiles that, you know, we've located on the project reach that are very high don't come from off-site. They're primarily, you know, they're strictly draining the site that we're proposing to do work on. Now, in some locations, we know that some of the wetlands that we've proposed to excavate will intercept those tile drains. And in those locations, we propose to cut those tile drains so that they now drain into the wetland. And then the outlet from those wetlands will be a lower elevation than the elevation of the tile line. So water coming in through that tile will continue to drain.
So, don't mean to interrupt, but so you're saying there are no drain tiles coming in from the farmers area?
There are a couple that are low enough that could potentially go underneath that perimeter ditch, and those are very close to Mequon Road, and those ones we won't be impacting.
So you don't know for you don't know for sure if drain tiles coming from the farmers' fields are entering into that property?
We're fairly confident that in that location, those tile drains that are entering the creek on this parcel do not come from adjacent farm fields.
Okay.
Alderman Giro.
It's interesting because I thought you said you surveyed all the drain tiles, but I'm sure you couldn't survey all the drains because, have you surveyed all the drains?
We surveyed every drain that was visible. So there are some that are already full and, you know, completely occluded. And if we couldn't see them, they were already full of sediment, then no, we did not survey those.
Yeah, just because I just know that I have drain tiles coming through my property from farms well to the west. And I didn't know that until I dug up my property 4 feet down to put in my own drainage system. And I hit one after the other after the other. And I had to back those up and make sure that they drained into the new drain system that I put in, or my bluff might collapse. So there's problems with not knowing where the drain tiles are and cutting them off and by accident. And then I had, just out of my intuition tells me, you know, I know how, I studied a lot of geography in college, and, you know, meandering streams move slower than straight streams do, which means that sediment would build up more in a meandering stream. In the corners, I had Oxbow Lakes, that's a meandering stream. It completely cuts it off. So I think the water flow will be faster through a direct channel than it would be through a meandering channel. That's what I was taught, at least. I guess maybe if you're shaking your head no, I would think that maybe I was taught wrong in geography for years and years in college. Just moving on, I was really concerned about this project last time around. And I spoke and asked you, and I said, go back and look. What are you actually going to do? And my main problem is the invasive species, because I managed your other projects, the 92 acres along Lakeshore, where it's full of buckthorn and poison ivy, and the water just backs up, and my residents continually, and I got some more reports just this last week, the buckthorn getting into their properties, and they have to cut that. There's no buckthorn management there. And I did at one time, it was in your Green Seams project, and I went out and walked the property about Huntington Park, back along the stream and back in those areas, and that's an MMSD property. There was tons of buckthorn there, so there's no management whatsoever done on an invasive species on your other projects. And, nowhere in those projects did I see that. So we asked what you were going to come up with. What are you going to come up with for invasive species? And it says here that as a condition of the issuance the city requires blah, blah, blah. You haven't come up with anything. All you have is an idea that you're going to come up with something, and you're asking us to vote on it. And then what are you actually going to do? I wanted some details. How are you going to do this? Who's going to do it, when they're going to do it? You haven't done that with the county at all yet. You're going to come up with a memorandum of understanding. I can't vote for something I asked last time around. Show me what you're going to do. Now you say, well, we're going to do something. That's what you're telling me. You're going to do something. And what if you don't do it? Does the city sue you? How do they make you do this? And the property owners, this isn't something that's broken right now and needs to be fixed. I'm looking at this and I couldn't vote for this. Yeah, I just couldn't vote for it. You have some promises, and I'm not sure what. It just, some little things just bother me on this. It says, enhance wetland and stream habitats for a variety of fish. Well, I can see the wildlife, but I don't know what fish are going to, it sort of reminds me of a couple of years ago when NOAA came and said they're going to protect shipwrecks. They didn't have a budget to do that, and that wasn't the idea. They were just going to take over the clear water or fresh water of Lake Michigan. I'm looking at this in perpetuity. Yeah, we put that in there. How long is it? And I listened to the landowners here. Sure, the guy from the county board, and the county board likes this. I asked the county board one time to come in, on Lakeshore Drive, we had a deer that was hit, and it was the county's job to pick up that dead deer, and my residents were complaining about it, and they said, no. The county said, oh yeah, we'll pick up that dead deer, because the city, it wasn't their jurisdiction. You know what they did? They took it off of Lakeshore and dragged it over to Hemlock. I'm uncomfortable with the county taking over projects in Mequon based on what they've done in the past. You have to watch what you do and not what you say. So I asked that you come up with some solutions. And you said, well, maybe, or we're going to come up with a memorandum of understanding. I can't vote for something on you're going to do or you might do. I said, I would like to see this, we're going to do this monthly, we're going to do that monthly. Here's the funds we're going to allocate toward this, so this doesn't become just an area for invasive species to grow. And for the landowners, properties to be flooded.
Alderman Schneider.
I come back to the landowners again with concern on the drain tiles, not knowing the locations, what's going to happen with that. I think the downside is going to adversely affect them more than the upside. I think we have no commitment out of the county level. We have one supervisor that says he likes the project. We don't know where everybody else stands. I would love to know where the rest of the county stands on that, what their agreement would be into this. And if we don't have that, how can we as a board make a decision without knowing what the other variables are, whether they're gonna be in support, not in support, whether they're gonna help maintain? I think so. I think at this point, I think I'm gonna request to table this again. I would like to make a motion to table.
Motion to table, it's not debatable. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Alderman Meyer,
No.
Alderman Hancher,
No.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
No.
Alderman Nurbin,
No.
Alderman Strelchek,
Nope.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
3 ayes and 4 noes.
There has to be 8.
3 noes and 4 ayes.
Sorry, 3 ayes and 5 noes.
Okay, so it's not tabled. So, Alderman Bushy.
So this goes back to one of the concerns I had raised last month with all of the individuals and the neighbors who showed up, and I appreciate the time that they've taken once again to show up. And I'd like to say recently, in a different matter concerning one of the MMSD areas, I received in my position complaints or issues as far as maintenance goes. And that goes back to one of the points I raised. And I know that I, as a landowner, homeowner in Mequon, that if I don't maintain my property, that there's procedures that go in place, neighbors report, and there's responses, and I have certain times to fulfill those. And I look at this, again, reading the extra language that was provided here about monitoring, which I think is great, is to add monitoring. But it has in language where the department may conduct additional monitoring and follow procedures that they deem. I need, in order to look at this in a favorable way, to say yes, is some mechanism that if a neighbor, somebody comes up with an issue and says, there's, whether it's invasive species or some damage that's being done, a mechanism so that they can communicate back to the MMSD, and that there's a response mechanism that the city has some more authority over, because, again, given this other situation, it seems as though there's not a feedback mechanism, and the resident is just at a loss as to what they can do, and are left hanging there with their property value being diminished. And whether it is or isn't the fault or anything at MMSD, it's the perception that it is, because they're not getting the proper response. And I would think that that would need to be, and the reason I'm in favor of tabling this now is that to have that language firmly in here and with a mechanism for the city to enforce that.
Alderman Schneider.
I just want to go back briefly to the meandering stream versus the straight channel situation, because is it agreed that creating a meandering channel would slow the flow of water down?
It depends on how the channel is configured. We did a lot of analysis to look at the actual water velocities that would be anticipated, and the way that we're achieving higher water velocities in the channel is by creating a narrower channel during low flow conditions. So the water is confined to a smaller area, and therefore it is faster.
So that's that little on the diagram, that little notch that's cut out of the center part of it. And then you created additional areas where in floods or high water situations where the water is someplace to spread out into and not flood. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yes, and so when in that floodplain area remains very straight. We are not trying to add length to that bigger, floodplain conveyance corridor.
So I just wanted to clarify, because when Alderman Gurr was speaking, you were shaking your head, and I know that some of the other folks had this concern of what happens to sediments in the situation where there's a meandering stream, because my understanding from what you were saying was that the water straight flow comes, so it comes in these bands through that straight flow, and that can create impediments or sediments. But how does the meandering stream, you seem to indicate that actually improves the situation with sediment deposition.
It does, largely through narrowing that channel. So by, The flow, the total flow in your channel is equal to the velocity that it's flowing at times the cross-sectional area. So if you decrease the cross-sectional area, you have to increase the velocity. It's kind of like when you have a hose and you put your thumb over part of it and it makes it go faster.
So it's not so much the creation of the meander than it is the narrowing of the stream that makes the flow increase?
Correct.
Gotcha, okay.
Alderman Carroll.
How does narrowing the channel increase the wildlife and the fish? You're really taking away water and trying to get it out of the area faster. So if you narrow the channel and it's moving faster, how's that better for fish habitat and for other habitat? It's just it sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's a good question. So by narrowing that channel, we are able to achieve actually a higher depth of flow, by pinching that closer. So it's more, it's more consolidated rather than being spread out over just a flat area. The other thing is, and the reason that we put the meanders in is kind of like when you're in a carnival ride and you go around a corner, you feel like you're going faster, you are going faster, and you feel that, centripetal and centrifugal forces, and those forces help scour out pools in the outer bends of the channel. And so that's how natural streams and restored streams maintain pools and, more habitat diversity with respect to the water depth.
I would just add quickly again, the design is for a range of flows. So when we're talking about the narrow stream channel and the forces that Beth mentioned, that's at a low flow situation. When we have high flows, it's that wider straight floodplain that carries not only a greater volume, but in some cases, the high velocity also. It's the low flows that we can keep that channel scoured because we're narrowing the cross-sectional area. So it's only under those low flows. And that depth that we provides for passage of fish. Oftentimes, if in a low flow situation, you can get very diffuse, spread out depth, and it is not passable, ends up being an impediment. So by creating a situation under a low flow where there's greater depth, then we can get passage. The high flows and again, the adjacent floodplain provides that spawning area, that is seasonal. And again, this is not only a range of flows, but a range of time throughout the season. So, August behaves very differently than March. And so the design accounts for that whole range of flows and those seasonal timeframes.
Question for me, maybe to Director Lundin, because she may be more familiar with my question. Isn't this similar to what we did on the Trinity Creek Restoration Project west of the Milwaukee River? So that also was a spawning area for fish.
You can ask me, but that project predates me, so I can't.
Well, that's true. But I thought maybe you knew the project.
We know the project because Ozaki County did that project in conjunction with MMSD and Milwaukee and so forth. So we were partly involved in that as a spawning wetland area. And we've subsequently worked on areas of Trinity Creek with a brand new $500,000 culvert along Trinity Creek in Mequon on Highway 57 with DOT to open up passage to that spawning wetland. So we were very involved in making Trinity Creek more passable.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Alderman Meyer.
No, frankly, I'm very torn on this. A couple of reasons why. Not an engineer, but I lived in that area for quite a long period of time, and it does regularly flood. It's pretty deep, and concern is that it's going to handle that, it's going to improve that, and I'm not really sure that it's going to in my mind. You're telling me it is. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm concerned about the fact, and on the flip side of that, I'm concerned for the, I'm torn between the fact of that, I have some of the farmers that are telling me that that area that's currently there right now is silting in, and it's not doing its job as draining. So if that is being removed now, I would think that that would improve that for that situation. Hopefully so in that, but then on the flip side of it, there's concern about, and the reason why I'd want to be in perpetuity is because of the fact of the invasive species, and inside of that area, you would want to have that taken care of, and I don't want to have the city to have that responsibility then to do that. So, me as a Mequon resident and as an official, I would want to make sure it is in perpetuity for it. Doesn't mean this county is going to go along with it, but I mean, I would want that. So I'm just toying on the thing, and I think it's going to be a last-minute decision on whether or not I'm going to vote for it or not. Those are the reasons, but I think it's a nice-looking project. I mean, I hopefully, if it goes through, I think that it will do what it's supposed to do on it, and I'm just kind of crossing my fingers that it does.
Would you mind if I just made one comment?
Sure. You may.
Thank you. I just want, in your concern for kind of the flood storage or, the flooding, I would just say, very simply, we're going to be removing a great deal of volume of soil that's going to create more space for water on that parcel, not on adjacent parcels, but on that parcel. So it should, in fact, assist in those situations where there's higher propensity for flooding.
Yes, sir.
I don't know that there's a middle ground between now and perpetuity, but I think we'll attempt to find one, and we took some direction from our Natural Resources Committee to address the maintenance concerns that were raised by City of Mequon. The county has offered to step up in those areas. Obviously, there's a language to require us to do that for 3 years, and we will recommend additional language to the board to consider 5-year increments or potentially longer with evergreen language, if you will, so that either party, it will continue as long as neither party objects. So I think that's maybe the middle ground between perpetuity and where we are today. So I think we're attempting to work on that, but again, that would be our recommendation to the county board.
Might I make a suggestion also to the language of paragraph E, if people are going to vote for this? After the word address on the second line, so it says that the intergovernmental cooperation agreement between MMSD and Ozaukee County address, comma, in form and content reasonably acceptable to the city of Mequon, comma, so that this is a condition of the issuance of the permit that this get done. But it doesn't really say address in what fashion, not that we're going to dictate the terms, but that we at least see what it is and it's reasonably acceptable. Yes, sir.
Just want to add, I know the issue of budget came up and cost. I think, we've looked at this from a county budgetary perspective. It's similar to, many other parcels that we maintain throughout the county, so I don't anticipate any budgetary hurdles to overcome. I know that issue was raised, at least in public comment.
I would add one other thing. I'll pass the gavel to Alderman Strelchek, but the Trinity Creek project, if you go visit that, is a very nice project, and it's actually a kind of a great nature preserve for people in Mequon to wander around. I understand that there are some projects that aren't particularly well kept, as does the city of Mequon have properties that are not particularly well maintained. But on that waterway, the county or the city or somebody has done it, and it's not full of buckthorn. I'd also add that if we turn this down, the property already is getting full of buckthorn. And this, so to the extent we're concerned about invasives, we already ought to be concerned about them. Here, we're at least getting a resolution that says that there needs to be some sort of a plan for addressing them, which is something, if we turn this down, we don't have. And then need to find a way to enforce based on our existing ordinances against MMSD. I also understand the county's likely to take title to this property, but that's a different issue. It doesn't matter who takes title to it. So I can't see you know, my comments are more addressed towards the dealing with invasives and dealing with the current conditions, which are not great. It has worked for a long time, but it worked because it was a sod farm. There was somebody who had ownership who maintained the property reasonably well because they had a need to maintain the property. Whether you like it or not, that owner is no longer there. As far as the drain tiles goes, there's already an issue with failing. It also seems to me that if you're opening up drain tile, it's going to allow a place for the water to run, which is into this facility. But Alderman Schneider.
I think if you look at the Trinity project versus some of the other ones, you're looking at, you know, they got lucky on that one. I think if you look at the majority of the stuff they do, it's a problem. They don't maintain it. It's not being done. And to sit up here and to say we're gonna cross our fingers and we're gonna hope the project turns out all right. We're gonna say that to those residents. We hope it's okay. We hope we're gonna do it right, but we're not guaranteeing anything, and you're gonna be the ones that are gonna suffer for it. If you're sitting up here and you think, well, they might do a good job, then I think that's a vote for no. So that's what I'm gonna say.
Alderman Strelchak.
Do we have any examples of projects that didn't go well? I mean, I guess, you know, we've got the deer example that we had that came up in Buckthorn and other properties, but I mean, everything I'm seeing here, you're gonna take on more water on the site. You've got drain tiles which are currently silted in, they're not doing their function. You've identified several of those already. You know, I do agree with Alderman Gill and Alderman Schneider that, you know, I am concerned about the people upstream and downstream. You know, the waterway comes from one direction and it goes to the next. You can't back it up in one direction or impede flow or overflow it in another direction. I mean, you really got to do it right. I'm going to bring up one point on tabling. You're never going to get a vote from me on tabling. If you bring it up before we've had some discussion on it, I'm always going to vote no whether I agree with the tabling or not. So had you waited till later in the discussion, I might have gone along with it. I'm just bringing that up just as a gentleman's comment to let you know how you can gain my support on some things like that. Because I didn't mean to vote no and not on your behalf. But, you know, this parcel in a heavy rainfall, I can kayak the entire thing. It's flooded. You know, I agree with what the mayor's comments are. It's got invasive species on it already, and so does, quite frankly, half of Mequon. It's not an excuse to not address it. It's not an excuse to turn a blind eye, but the fact that we've got a maintenance agreement here is a step in the right direction. I know the county doesn't like in perpetuity, but you're not going to mess with Mequon land and not be expected to ignore it. I mean, it's not going to happen. You know, you get my no vote, I don't even want to talk to you if you're not going to maintain your site and you're coming forward with a proposal. You know, that being said, I mean, the water flow narrowing at the channel, I mean, I'm a fisherman and I fish rivers. I know exactly what happens and where, and I know that when it's wide and it's flat, you don't have any pools for the wildlife. It also dries up. It's more exposed to evaporation. You don't have the fish capability in there. You're dredging a pond, you're making it deeper. I think the one thing that I'd like to see in this is just a little more clarity on those drain tiles. You know, that's what the farmers are coming forward with, is the clarity on the drain tiles and the ones that you don't know. Like, if you run into one, what's your policy on that? I mean, how do you address that? Do you go to Kristen and say, hey, Kristen, we found an extra drain tile. We don't know where it comes from. Can you help us address that? Do you have a response to that?
I do. We can commit to ensuring that the outlet from any wetland that we construct, that a tile drain, you know, if we cut a tile drain into a wetland, we can commit to creating an outlet from that is below the elevation of that tile drain so that it does drain positively.
Okay. And then would city staff be notified I mean, do they have a list of the drain tiles that you know currently? I mean, what do you have on file, Kristen?
We don't have a mapping system aside from if the development came forward and otherwise did a survey, much as the county did. We don't have any other documentation citywide for drain tiles.
Would you agree to give her the documentation as it comes forward and the documentation that you have?
Of course.
Figured that would be a logical yes. All right, those are my main questions.
Alderman Meyer.
One final thing. The city attorney, the process of this is, if we approve this and it stays in there into perpetuity, it goes back to the county and they say, no, 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 we're not gonna do that. It has to come back before us again for a change in that or for their solution for this, correct?
Right, based on the language as it sits right now, that is correct, that it would require some additional action from this body in order to address that. If there was, as part of the motion or as part of a change to a motion, either way, but if the mayor's language would be adopted, you could perceivably end up in a circumstance where you would have something that would be less than, I mean, the agreement would be we'd address something in perpetuity, but what we're gonna do in perpetuity might be this much. It might not technically satisfy what you're looking for, so.
Without my language. My language ensures that that doesn't happen.
Right.
Okay, I thought you said with my language that happens.
Sorry. Yes, right. Just gonna tap on it because that's gonna really, right, it's just gonna really
There we go.
You got it.
make the people.
How's it
listening
now?
at home
Oh, there we go.
happy when I pound on it. Yeah, so, yes, as the mayor says, if I said the other way, that was a mistake. But with the mayor's language, our approval then would, kind of allow us to review that, so that it's not, some minuscule amount of what's there. In other words, that we have the ability to kind of hold them to maybe a higher standard than they might try to get away with otherwise. And get away with is not a fair term. I mean, don't mean to suggest that the county would, intentionally try to do something like that, but it just gives us the review authority.
Call the vote.
Alderman Bushy.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to ask, first of all, can you repeat the language, and was that actually added?
After the word address, it would be comma, informant content reasonably acceptable to the city of Mequon.
And how would that be decided?
Well, there's two ways to do it. That's a good question. I mean, it might have to come back to us, or we could do it where we could have it approved by, staff or staff and the mayor, or however you guys wanted to do it, but we should add that in, what you want.
Right. If you don't add anything, then it would come back
It
to
would
the
come
full
back,
body.
yeah.
Well, first thing is, I think the common council would feel more comfortable if it came back to us instead of it. No offense to city staff by any means.
So do we have a motion?
Can I just,
Motion to approve.
Well, hold on, do we suspend the rules? Go ahead.
I just had one more question. So the argument, the disagreement here is in perpetuity, which you've already said tonight that you really don't agree with that and you don't want to go along with that. Is that what you said earlier? That you're not in agreement with the in perpetuity clause?
I said the language that we would propose to the county board would address maintenance in incremental years that would self-renew. So it would evergreen unless either party objected.
So if either party objected, it wouldn't continue? Which is your way of getting out of the clause of in perpetuity?
I believe I said we
So we
attempted to
already-
find a middle ground between today and
So we already
perpetuity.
know going forward right now that they're not in agreement, and they don't want to go in to do in perpetuity. So
Well,
if
you're
they
only,
don't want to do that and they're telling us they're not in agreement with that, then why would we vote to do this?
well, this is a staff person, not the county board, who makes the decisions. And we're giving a direction to the county board, they can do with it as they will, or we come back and re-examine this, if that's what you guys want to do.
I just wanted to make it clear that they're not in favor of that and that they're objecting to that part. And that seems to be the part that we want.
I think just about everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody's had two kicks at the cat. We either need to move to suspend,
I haven't kicked the cat once. So.
All right.
I think all they're saying is they can't agree to that in its current form. They would need to go back and get that approved by the board. I think adding the provision, which is, I think, an amendment, so.
Well, we don't have
No,
a
we don't have
motion
a
yet,
motion.
so.
We don't have a motion yet, but maybe we'll need a motion to amend. But that gives them time to go back and gnaw on it and present a reasonable proposal. And I need to see it written down in some form, but if it's reviewing it every 5 years and we can continually renew this agreement, I think that goes a long way towards satisfying that, but I guess we have to see what comes back.
I don't know that, and I should say, there would be no objection to the county following all ordinances, as we do with every county property in the city of Mequon. I think we've heard some complaints about different properties in the city. I don't believe those were county properties. I believe they may have been MMSD properties in the city. So, I think the former foretells the latter, right? So if you look at our parks in the city of Mequon, they're well maintained. Yes, do we have some invasive species in those parks? We do. Do we combat them the same way that the city does? Yes, we do. Do we make sure we follow the ordinances of the city of Mequon within those park areas that are owned by Ozaki County? Of course we do. So, in terms of committing to that, that is something that I don't believe, we've done it in perpetuity.
And I think it all stems from the fact that the current site is a bit of a mess and is getting to the point where it could legitimately be considered unmaintained. And I think this is going to go a long way towards cleaning that up. And the best thing you can do to prevent the invasives from coming in is restoring it and putting the right habitat in there, which I think is evidenced by what's happened over at Trinity Creek, where it's a bit of a mess. You go in and clean it up, and then if it's done right, it maintains itself that way for a good long time without a lot of oversight, which I think is what the result we're going to get here.
Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to amend the statement as proposed by the mayor.
Well, to approve it with the statement. Is that what you're offering? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
No.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
No.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
No.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
5 ayes, 3 noes.
That the resolution passes as amended. The next item on the agenda is a resolution confirming 6 change orders authorized for the Mequon Civic Campus parking lot project to Pubblocki Paving Corporation in the amount of $58,718.18. What did Public Works do with this evening?
It's recommended 3-0.
So we have a recommendation from the Public Works Committee. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
And a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none, please call the roll.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
That passes. Resolution 3643, resolution awarding a contract for ash tree removal services in the amount of $47,000 to Wallace Tree and Landscape, Inc. of Glendale. What did the Public Welfare Committee do with that this evening?
That was also recommended 3-0.
So we've got a recommendation. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
That passes unanimously. We have no specified unfinished business, no presentation of petitions, memorials, remonstrances, or communications. No specified miscellaneous new business. We do have a potential closed session for the installation of a pedestrian railroad crossing between Spur 16 and the Civic Campus. The Common Council may convene into closed session pursuant to WISTAT 1985 1E and G for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require, and also conferring with legal counsel as rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the council with respect to litigation in which it is involved, and then may reconvene in open session to take such action as deemed appropriate. Do we have a motion? Alderman Garrow.
I just wanted to make a comment. I'll make the motion to go into closed session. I don't see Cindy Schaefer here, but I was gonna say that, you know, if she wanted to lay out her case, she could lay out her case right here in front of us, besides going into closed session. So I'll make a motion to go into closed session.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I'd just like to comment for the record that the comments made earlier, while I'm not going to make specific comments, for anybody who listened to them, were incredibly misleading and not there may have been individual facts that are correct, but didn't represent what's happened. And I think people ought to know that, but because we're a responsible group and we're not going to go into that here. So we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin?
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak?
No.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Meyer?
No.
Alderman Hancher?
Aye.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
And once again, I vote aye, even though you don't ask me, because I still think I should on a motion to go into closed session.